Next week, we're going to be talking about smart meters and the idea that smart meters should serve the consumer or should serve the utility industry, or who, in fact, should they serve? That's something that you have a little bit of expertise in.
A lot of expertise.
You invented them?
Going back to 1990, yes.
Yeah. And you've also been doing, through your company, a lot of research into fusion. And that's something, fusion as an energy source.
As an energy source.
And that's something that, of course, has excited the scientific community for decades. The only kind of fusion energy that I'm aware of that's ever been successful is the fusion bomb, and that's not exactly harnessable for generating power. How close are you to figuring out a way to use fusion to harvest usable energy?
Well, when you say how close are you, certainly not me as an individual, but we have to look at various laboratories around the country and around the world that are dedicated to this task. Going back into the early 1950s, both our country as well as Russia did a significant amount of work in the development of fusion. However, most of that work early on was done for military purposes. In 1961, the Russians detonated a nuclear weapon using fusion power, which vaporized an entire island in less than a second. So certainly the amount of energy that can be generated from a very small amount of mass, in that case hydrogen and lithium, is absolutely enormous. That bomb, which by the way was called Tsar Bomba, October 1961, released enough energy to run the city of Las Vegas for about 3 years. So yes,
that's
indeed.
Huge.
The fuel cycle involved is an isotope of hydrogen and a second isotope of hydrogen that is readily available, breeding it from lithium. The problem is most of the research has been conducted by the military side of the equation, and a division of the Department of Energy, which very few people are aware of, called the NNSA, which is the National Nuclear Safety Administration. But roughly one half of the Department of Energy's $22 billion per year budget, or $11 billion per year, is spent on what we call nuclear weapons stockpiled stewardship, because we can no longer test nuclear weapons. So the concept of developing fusion power for civilian purposes to solve our energy crisis has basically been hijacked by the military, so to speak,
so it's on
in
the back
efforts
burner
to maintain the nuclear arsenal. Having said that, we are indeed facing an energy crisis, which most people are unaware of. By the year 2050, 2060, we will have depleted economically recoverable fossil fuels, meaning oil and coal. And I say that based on the fact that other countries now, China, India, South Africa, all parts of Africa, are increasing their amounts of energy enormously in their attempts to catch up with the Western style of life. So whereas in the past the United States had roughly 4% of the world's population and we consume 28% of the world's energy, those days are gone. We're going to see energy use increase by a factor of 4 or 5 over the next 20 or 30 years. That's going to put us into a crisis, and the only solution to that is nuclear fusion.
Yes. And so back to my original question, how close is the nuclear fusion industry, as it were, to something that works?
If we were to put political will and money on the problem, we could do it within a decade. As President Kennedy challenged Americans, not the government, but challenged Americans to put a man on the moon and return safely. He made that challenge in 1961. We got it done by 1969.
So
we could demonstrate nuclear fusion in a controlled environment within 10 years and certainly commercialize it within 15 years thereafter.
So are you saying that the science is there, it's not just a matter of development?
The science is there, but we have to better understand the science, and we have development that has to occur after we have this better understanding of the science.
What better understanding?
Today, the United States has basically gutted the fusion research in our country in favor of a project in the south of France, which is run by the UN, of which the United States is only a 9% partner of. So whereas we're spending roughly $95 billion a year on various forms of medical research, we're spending less than $300 million a year in fusion energy research, and all of that money is being spent on projects that relate to ITER, or this project in the south of France, which, as I said, is under the direction of the UN.
I did read.
Well, given the you know, as you mentioned, the vast increase in energy consumption by China, India, and the rest of what used to be called the third world.
Yes.
And the fact that we don't have any monopoly on scientific knowledge in the United States.
No longer.
Will there be, or is there a possibility that other countries, either in the private sphere or in the public sphere, will be able to leapfrog into developing this before the U.S. does?
Oh, absolutely. China is number 1 on that list, and South Korea is number 2. Japan and Russia are actually ahead of us.
Interesting. That's the show for this week. We'll see you again next week on Libertarian.